Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jasmine Tolbert, and I'm the president of the NAACP Vancouver. We've called you all here today for an announcement regarding policing in Vancouver and Clark County. After years of racial profiling, discriminatory policing, excessive force, and a disturbing favoritism to known white supremacist extremist groups, NAACP Vancouver, the ACLUs of Washington and Oregon, as well as several other organizations, have formally requested the United States Department of Justice to investigate the Vancouver Police Department, Clark County Sheriff's Office, and a joint drug task force between the two agencies. We've made this request due to a pattern of excessive force and deadly force against communities of color and some of our most vulnerable residents. For years, law enforcement in Vancouver and Clark County have engaged in discriminatory policing against people of color, residents experiencing homelessness, and those with a mental health disability, while showing favor to known white supremacist extremist groups. This disparate policing causes lasting harm for residents and undermines public safety for the community at large. I'm joined by Inoka Harat of the ACLU of Washington, who will talk about our letter to the Department of Justice and put it into context. I'm also joined by Nakia Hunter and Kevin Peterson Sr., two community members who've lost loved ones due to the police violence and know firsthand the trauma of losing a loved one because of the direct actions of law enforcement in this community. All residents of Vancouver and Clark County deserve equal and professional treatment by police officers. But these highly publicized incidents described in the letter erode already strained relationships between the community and local law enforcement. All because of this, we believe a federal investigation is needed to address the patterns and practices of discriminatory policing and to assure that everyone in Vancouver and Clark County enjoys equitable security and public safety, free of discrimination. Thank you once again for joining us. I will now turn things over to Inoka Harat from ACLU of Washington. Inoka.
Clayton Joseph, Michael Eugene Pierce, Carlos Hunter, William Abbey, Andrew Williams, Kevin Peterson Jr., Genoa Donald, Kiffin Caruo. These were human beings that were killed by Vancouver Police Department or Clark County Sheriff's Office over the past 2.5 years. But this does not include all the people of color and those experiencing crisis who have been shot at or physically harmed because of these law enforcement agencies. My name is Inoka Harat, and I'm the Police Practices and Immigration Counsel at the ACLU of Washington. We have worked alongside over 20 organizations and many, many community members residing in Vancouver and Clark County to call on the US Department of Justice to investigate the police practices here, because what we have seen stands out. The racial disparity in policing actions, coupled with the favoritism towards known white supremacist extremist groups, is incredibly concerning. Over a 2.5-year period, law enforcement in this area has killed 8 people. This is one of the largest concentrations of police killings across the state since Initiative 940, a statewide de-escalation and mental health training requirement, was passed in Washington state in December 2018. Of these, 63% of the people killed were people of color, including 3 Black men and 2 Pacific Islanders, despite the fact that Black people and Pacific Islanders together account for about 3% of the Clark County population. In nearly all cases, police justified the use of lethal force with the same narrative that the person failed to comply. However, many of the cases lack any corroborating evidence from other witnesses. It is simply the word of officers. Officers also killed people in mental health crisis or who were suicidal. Many of these incidents make clear that officers did not make efforts to de-escalate or use less lethal alternatives, and instead, multiple officers pointed their firearms and eventually shot and killed people. But it's not just deadly force. Based on VPD's own data, people of color are significantly more likely than a white person to be the subject of police use of force and to traffic stops. These communities are being over-policed. And yet, we also heard from community members that when people of color needed protection from law enforcement, officers have not served the community. Instead, records we received from these agencies show that deference was given to white supremacist extremist groups. Officers failed to protect neighbors of color who were attending a vigil for Kevin Peterson Jr., who was slain by police. Those attending the vigil were assaulted by members of the Proud Boys, Patriot Prayer, and other counter-protesters. Police stood by and did nothing. By contrast, when Patriot Prayer held a memorial, VPD designated that event as expressive speech and created an operational plan outlining how officers were to protect them and create a welcoming environment. This disparate treatment, disparate use of policing resources, disparate protection, and favoritism towards white supremacist extremist groups is wrong. All residents of Vancouver and Clark County deserve equal and professional treatment by police officers. Each of these facts and statistics has a real story and real people behind them. Here to share their story is Nakia Hunter. I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Nakia Hunter, and I am the sister of Carlos Hunter. My family has been affected by Clark County's unjust, biased, racial-based policing. This county has always prided itself for being a progressive place where everyone could thrive. At least that was true for white people. Black and brown and BIPOC, quiet heavy. Black, brown, and BIPOC residents all too often face persistent racism in the way police treat us and ultimately justify our killings. March 7th, 2019, Carlos Hunter was placed in a staged traffic stop on a very busy street in Clark County. He was pulled over, and in 5 minutes of conflicting, confusing commands being given by multiple detectives on the scene, Carlos was attacked and tased 4 times maximum voltage, and then shot 16. 16 bullets ripped through his body as he was seatbelted in his vehicle, with his hands in the air at some point. Trace the bullets, they tell a story. The officers used a flanking maneuver, crossing Carlos in their fire. They used the media to paint Carlos as a villain, a drug dealer, a thug, never stating the facts that the only gang he ever belonged to was formed of juveniles trying to make it out of lengthy sentences for youthful mistakes and poor choices that broke the laws. Within the walls of their confinement, they vowed to protect each other. That is the only gang Carlos Hunter ever belonged to besides that of his current gang, his children, one of whom he was going to pick up that day. His children's lives were forever changed that day. The media never stated that he was 18 years felony free, that he had only $31 to his name, that the operations plan, to say the least, was flawed, inaccurate, and misleading. It set the stage for the all too wavering verdict, justified on all counts for all actions in the murder of all of the victims since I-940 was placed into law in 2018. For years, Clark County police have persistently abused Black and brown residents, even children. When we as a community see nothing wrong with where the bar has been set at holding our law enforcement accountable for their actions and taking lives with force that no one could survive, overkilling, causing community harm, treating people inhumanely, and deciding it reasonable to kill them is not the call our peace officers should be allowed to make. The actions of the Clark County law enforcement over-policing its communities of color and most vulnerable residents, building cases and handpicking the suspects, allowing individuals to be killed over hearsay, not facts that would stand through a conviction in the court of law, showing favoritism toward white supremacists only exacerbates mistrust of the police and a sense of fear within our community. Public safety for our entire community suffers as law enforcement further alienates potential allies in crime prevention. Police brutality can have lasting, alarming effects on people of color. The justification of police killings and disproportionate use of force against communities of color, the disproportionate targeting of people of color in traffic stops, the lack of protection for Black protesters, the negative assumptions about Black activists, blaming the victims of police violence continues to the disproportionate amount of chronic stress endured by communities of color. This isn't just a mission, it's a call to action. I'm calling you to act on these injustices that kill these 9 men in Clark County in under 3 years. Clayton Joseph, Michael Pierce, Carlos Hunter, William Abe, Andrew Williams, David Valgren, Genoa Donald, Kevin Peterson Jr., and Kevin Carrero. I plan to bring the voices of all community, to stand up for the dignity of all people, regardless of race or social economic status. The NAACP Vancouver and the Clark County Justice Group are here to create a community where equity and human decency characterize our culture, where white privilege does not define our institutions, a community where racist ideas that have become normalized through culture, social systems, and institutions are eliminated. Slavery did not end, it evolved. When you understand the roots of the tree, you will understand the fruits of the tree. And it will take us all to dismantle this system of justified oppression and death that has affected our community as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikia. Up next, we have Kevin Peterson Sr. In 2020, Clark County Sheriff's deputies killed his son, Kevin Peterson Jr. He will talk about that loss, as well as the horrific day where a group of white supremacists assaulted mourners at a vigil for his son, and the lack of response from law enforcement. Kevin.
In Clark County, white supremacist extremists are protected and supported by law enforcement in exercising their First Amendment rights to free speech, whereas Black demonstrators are viewed as threats and met with violence by police. Despite a national and local trend of armed white supremacist groups, as Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer, disrupting anti-brutality protests and visuals, we've seen, well, me and my family have seen with our own eyes at my son's visual last year, Proud Boys across the street, walking up and down the streets with their firearms visible, antagonizing all the people that were sitting there, coming to show support for my family and my son. No police presence at all. I feel like that needs to be changed because, we had a second visual downtown Vancouver, and we walked to the sheriff's office, and all you could see was sheriff's police everywhere, blocking off our routes, which way we could go, which way we couldn't go, etc. So things like that needs to be changed. The loss of my son is tremendous. Him running away from law enforcement and being shot from behind and killed without going through a step progression to de-escalate the situation needs to be changed. All law enforcement across the nation, across the world needs to go through a step progression when it comes to situations if their life is not in danger. My son lost his life and left a daughter here that I have to look after now. My granddaughter. it it hurts because, you know, I get to see her grow up, but see his face through her, you know, her calling me dada, but I have to turn around and correct her and say I'm papa. I shouldn't have to go through that. No family should. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. We will now pass it back over to Inoka, who will provide more information on what comes next.
Residents in Vancouver and Clark County have been calling for an end to discriminatory policing for years, yet bias and violence persist. Vancouver PD and Clark County Sheriff's Office are fully aware of these incidents. This information is largely from their records and their data. But leaving the departments on their own has not solved the problem. We are not seeing change come from within. In 2019, the City of Vancouver commissioned the Police Executive Research Forum to review VPD's policies and practices around use of force. They did an extensive review and provided ample feedback. And despite that, 2 years later, people continue to be killed and practices don't seem to be changing. This year, our state legislature passed new laws that have resulted in a 60% decline in police killings across Washington. And yet in Clark County, someone was killed a month ago, and officers fired shots at multiple homes in the middle of the night while people slept. We are calling on the DOJ to investigate because we are calling for change. Federal intervention is required to bring about the change Clark County residents demand and deserve, so that all residents are safe and have equal treatment. So what does this request to DOJ mean? Our organizations are calling on the DOJ to open up a civil rights pattern or practice investigation into VPD and CCSO to examine the use of excessive force and discriminatory policing. Rather than looking at one incident at a time or looking at individual officers, DOJ can use this tool to root out police departments' systemic problems. Once DOJ completes their investigation, if they find that these agencies have engaged in a pattern or practice of policing that deprives people of their constitutional rights, then DOJ is authorized to bring a lawsuit against one or both departments, or they have other options. If the city and/or county and DOJ agree, they can enter into a consent decree where the departments agree to change their practices and policies and submit to court and DOJ monitoring, as Seattle did. The actions of Clark County law enforcement over policing its communities of color and most vulnerable residents while showing favoritism towards white supremacists only exacerbates mistrust of police and a sense of fear. Both U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland and U.S. Attorney Nick Brown have recognized that the harms of white supremacist extremism exist, particularly in law enforcement. Seeing the patterns of racial disparity in police killings, use of force, and traffic stops in Clark County, as well as the favorable treatment towards known white supremacist extremist groups, we urge them to investigate and bring change to Southwest Washington. Thanks.
Thank you, Inoka. I will now open it up for questions. You'll need to raise your hand to ask. And if you have called into the meeting, you will need to press *9 in order to raise your hand. Well, the first hand I see raised is Maxine Bernstein.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I just wondered what other community groups are joining with ACLU and NAACP in asking for the federal intervention.
Yes, we have 21 other organizations that have signed on. Some of those including the the Clark County Volunteer Lawyers Program, Disability Rights Washington, Faith Action Network, Indivisible Greater Vancouver, the Lewitt Sierra Club, an organization with the acronym of MOMS, NAMI Southwest Washington, Next Step Washington, Odyssey World International Education Services, One America, Pacific Islander Community Association of Washington, Ridgefield Community Group, SEIU Healthcare, 119 Northwest, Southwest Washington, League of United Latin American Citizens Council 47013, also known as LULAC, Statewide Poverty Action Network, Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, and YWCA Clark County. That was the list as of yesterday. That was prior to it completely closing, so there might be more included that you will see on the letter. Thank you. I want to reiterate that if you're on the phones and need to raise your hand to ask a question, you'll need to dial *9. And I also have other partners that are trying to field anything that's popping up in the participant list of folks that are raising their hands. Maxine, I see your hand raised.
This is for Anoka. I just wondered if you have any sense how long it may take before you get a response from the Federal Department of Justice. And I understand they usually do an investigation themselves before they agree to provide oversight. So I just wondered the process.
That's right. It'll be up to them to review the request, to do a little bit of initial research, and then to decide whether or not to actually do a full investigation. An investigation can take months, depending on the information and the data they have access to and how quickly they have access to that. So we're hoping for a response as soon as possible. Tomorrow is also a holiday, but we'll see.
Troy Reynoldsson.
Yeah.
And then Becca Robbins will take you next.
Can you hear me all right? Cool. So for Nikia and Kevin, I just was wondering, forgive me if this was already discussed and I missed it at the start here. If y'all could just share how y'all are feeling about going through this.
I would just say that the experience since my brother has been murdered has been waves of ups and downs. Some days there are triumphs, some days there are great letdowns. Other days, just the reality of the situation are very heavy. I'm very appreciative of the people that came together in the vision of justice and truth for all. And so it is my honor to see this through. And that's how I feel.
To Nikia's point, it's we have our good days and bad days. We come together as a family and just try to encourage one another to stay positive. Kevin's loss was a huge blow to our family. That's something that we never expected. But again, not again, but thanks to everyone who is pushing for justice for all the people that's involved in this situation. I wouldn't wish that on no one to lose a child, a brother, a mother, anything, you know. You get one chance at this thing we call life, and to lose a son at a young age, it's hard. You know, I try my best to, you know, stay out of harm's way and teach our kids the same thing. You know, but I'm pushing for justice. It's hard, but we'll stay strong and see what happens.
Thank you, Kevin. Becca Robbins.
Hi, thanks. I was just wondering if, as far as you know, if VPD and CCSO have been made aware of your request to the DOJ, and if you've heard anything from the agencies in terms of kind of a response to your request for an investigation to the departments.
At this time, they have not been made aware until this moment, so no, we have not received a response from them.
One thing I'll note is that much of this information is in their hands already. They're aware of these incidents. This is based on data and records that they provided. So this is all information that it should not be new to them.
Okay, we are gonna wrap for questions soon, unless I see another hand raised. Are there any other final remarks? Troy.
Yeah, I haven't seen this anywhere yet, but I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about what this step looks like, as far as, you know, it seems like a rare step that gets taken to actually get to this point in the minds of like a group like the ACLU or the NAACP. Could either of you, either Jasmine or Inoka, talk about the prevalence or lack thereof to get to this point with a region with a law enforcement coverage area?
Inoka, I'll let you begin. Yeah.
Sure. You know, it really was the pattern of police actions we were seeing in Clark County. The pattern of police killings makes Clark County have the highest percentage of Black people killed and the second highest percentage of people of color killed since I-940 went into effect. And these disparities were not just in lethal use of force, but also in just in general use of force incidents and in traffic stops. And these disparities, combined with the active white supremacist extremism in the county, raise the urgency of this request. And during this same time period, when you just look at the raw numbers, more people were killed in King County. But when you adjust for population, there's actually a greater risk of being killed by law enforcement in Clark County. And that risk goes up for people of color and is over 10 times higher for Black people in Clark County. And so when community members started sounding the alarm on this, and we started looking at it, the information and the records that we got was really alarming. And we wanted to raise it because there had already been efforts at the local level to try to bring change, and those were not working. And so that's why we are requesting, it seemed most appropriate to request federal intervention in this case.
Thank you, Inoka. We have sat in on conversations. We have participated in their committees. We have done so many things to move the needle forward when it comes to the disparate policing happening against our community. And it's come to the point that after death, unjust instance after unjust instance, it's come down to, we need another group. This needs to be reanalyzed, and this is where it's where we've landed. At the end of the day, all residents of Vancouver and Clark County, regardless of race, housing status, or mental health status, deserve fair, equal, and professional treatment by police, and no one should have to live in fear, which is happening right now. People are living in fear that their life could be unjustly taken in a police encounter. Becca Robbins, I see your hand raised.
Hi, thanks again. I was just wondering if maybe you could touch on sort of how long this step of going to the federal level has been in the works, if this was something that NAACP and the ACLU and other organizations have been talking about, for the past few years now, or if this step kind of was put on the table in light of the most recent shooting of Kefin Kuro, and if that was sort of the catalyst for this step, or kind of when this idea sort of was on the table.
I can start off. For years, we've been working towards this. We've been working towards resolving these issues in our community, but I am going to punt over to Anoka to speak about this process that led to this specific letter.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Over the years, as we've been hearing about these incidents, this hasn't been the first time we're hearing about it, and the incidents haven't stopped. As you noted, there was an incident just recently. And again, it's after new laws have been passed. It's after all these measures have been tried to reduce police violence, and Clark County stands out.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions, then we will come to a close. All right. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. As mentioned, I appreciate all on the call. Specifically, I want to highlight, thank you, Anoka from ACLU of Washington. Thank you, Kevin Peterson Sr., who has experienced so much trauma because of the police in this county. And thank you, Nakia Hunter, who also serves as the NAACP Legal Redress Chair. And I thank you for your activism, and I thank you for your vulnerability on this call today, as you had to speak on the killing of your brother, Carlos Hunter. Thank you, everyone, and we will now close.